My sister turned the whole family against me, and they cut me off for 13 years. But then my small business took off, and I ended up buying a mansion. The next day, she showed up. "Hey, I'm moving in since," she said, gesturing to the U-Haul truck idling in my driveway like it belonged there. My mother stood behind her, clutching a designer bag that looked as tired as their excuses. They thought 13 years of silence was just a pause button they could unpress because I finally had something they wanted. They were wrong. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's standing with me in this community. For the last 3 years, my life has smelled like eucalyptus, cold rain, and expensive silence. I live in a glass-walled fortress perched on a cliff overlooking the Puget Sound in Seattle. It is a place designed for ghosts or alchemists or people who just want to disappear into their work. I run a skincare empire that generates $3.2 million a year, blending botanical oils that promise peace to women who are just as tired as I used to be. My neighbors don't know my name. My employees know me only as a signature on a paycheck and a voice on a conference call. I built this life with the precision of a surgeon cutting away everything that didn't serve the quiet. I was standing at my kitchen island, a slab of black marble that cost more than the first car I ever owned, measuring drops of sandalwood into a beaker. The only sound was the relentless, comforting drumming of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The gray mist outside swirled against the glass, a barrier between me and the world I had left behind. I was safe here. I was untouchable, or so I thought. Then the sensor on my security gate triggered. A harsh electronic chime sliced through the stillness. I frowned, wiping my hands on a linen towel. I wasn't expecting a delivery. I tapped the screen of the security tablet mounted on the wall. The feed flickered to life, showing the winding driveway that led up from the main road. And there it was, a U-Haul truck. It was a monstrosity of orange and white dirty, with road grime lumbering up my pristine driveway like an infectious disease. It looked ridiculous against the backdrop of ancient pines and gray slate. My heart didn't race. It stopped. It went completely cold, a block of ice settling in the center of my chest. I watched as the truck shuddered to a halt right in front of my custom steel entry doors. The engine died with a rattle that seemed to shake the glass walls of my sanctuary. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Even from the grainy camera feed, I recognized the chaotic energy, the way she slammed the door a little too hard, the way she smoothed her hair as if she were about to walk a red carpet instead of trespassing. Paige, my sister. She was 32 now, but she moved with the same entitled clumsiness she'd had at 19. She was wearing a designer tracksuit that I knew was a knockoff, the bright pink clashing violently with the muted tones of my home. Then the passenger door opened. Christina, my mother. She moved slower, stiff from the drive, but her posture was unmistakable, rigid, imperious, the gatekeeper. She looked up at my house, not with awe but with appraisal, like she was inspecting a hotel room she had already decided was barely adequate. They stood there in the Seattle drizzle, staring up at my fortress. They didn't look like family. They looked like invaders. They looked like the past I had spent 13 years scrubbing off my skin. I watched them on the screen, my finger hovering over the intercom button. I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. They hadn't come to visit. You don't bring a 20-foot moving truck for a visit. They had come to collect. They had come to take. And for the first time in 13 years, I realized that the silence I had bought wasn't a shield. It was a dam. To understand why I didn't open the door, you have to understand the price of the lock. It cost me exactly $15,000 and 13 years of my life. The memory hit me hard, overlaying the gray Seattle rain with the sepia-toned suffocation of my mother's living room 13 years ago. I was 22 then. Smaller. Quieter. I was the person who apologized when someone else stepped on my foot. I came home one evening to find a letter on my bed. It was a collections notice. A credit card I had never opened, maxed out to the limit of $15,000. I remember the way my hands shook as I walked into the kitchen. Paige was there eating a yogurt, scrolling on her phone. She was 19. When I showed her the letter, she didn't gasp. She didn't deny it. She just shrugged. She said she needed a vacation, that she deserved a break, and that she intended to pay it back eventually. It was the casualness of it that broke me. As if my credit score, my financial future, was just another resource for her to harvest, like borrowing a sweater she would never return. Then Christina walked in. The gatekeeper. I waited for the outrage. I waited for her to parent. Instead, she looked at the letter, then at Paige, and finally at me. Her eyes were cold, calculating the social cost. She said we couldn't have a police record in the family. She said Paige had a future to protect. She told me to pay it. She didn't ask, she commanded. It's just money, Jasmine, she said. Don't ruin your sister's life over money. Fix it. I know what you're thinking. Why did I do it? Why didn't I walk out the door and drive straight to the police station? That is the question of someone who has never worn the invisible chain of the survivor. It is a prison without bars built brick by brick from childhood. I had been conditioned to believe that my only value lay in my utility. I was the shock absorber. I was the fixer. When you are raised to believe that your boundaries are an act of aggression against the people you love, saying no doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like dying. I paid the debt because I didn't know I was allowed not to. I paid it because I thought it was the fee for being part of the family. But that night, something snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet, like a tree branch giving way under heavy snow. I paid the $15,000. It wiped out my savings. It ruined my plans for grad school. But I paid it. And then, without saying a word, I packed 2 bags. I didn't leave a note. I didn't scream. I just vanished. For the next decade, I turned that pain into chemistry. I rented a damp basement apartment in Tacoma that smelled of mildew, and I started mixing. I learned that lye and fat, when combined perfectly, create something that cleanses. I became obsessed with purification. I worked 18-hour days, my hands raw from essential oils and exfoliants. I didn't date. I didn't make friends. I worked. I turned my trauma into a formula. I branded silence as luxury. I sold the feeling of being clean, of washing away the day of being untouchable. And the world bought it. They bought it in droves. My company Aura grew from farmers markets to high-end boutiques and finally to global distribution. Last year, we cleared $3.2 million in net revenue. I looked down at my hands, now resting on the cool marble counter. They were steady. They were the hands of a woman who had built an empire out of ash. I had paid my dues. I had paid their debt. And I realized with a jolt of cold satisfaction that the $15,000 I lost 13 years ago was the best investment I ever made. It was the severance package. It bought me my freedom, and there was no way in hell I was letting them refund it now. The buzzer on the wall chirped again, insistent and sharp. It was the sound of someone who believed their time was more valuable than mine. On the high-definition screen, I watched Paige lean into the camera. She adjusted her hair, checking her reflection in the lens as if it were a mirror. Jasmine, she said, her voice filtered through the digital speakers but still carrying that familiar grating pitch. We know you're in there. We saw the lights. Open the gate. She didn't ask. She instructed. It was a reflex muscle memory from a lifetime of being the center of gravity. Then Christina stepped forward, nudging Paige aside. She looked directly into the camera, her expression composing itself into a mask of benevolent matriarchy. Jasmine, she said, we're here. We're ready to put the past behind us. We forgive you. We forgive you. The words hung in the quiet of my kitchen, absurd and heavy. They were standing in the rain, uninvited, trespassing on my property, and they were offering me forgiveness. For a moment, I almost laughed, but then I looked closer at the screen. I zoomed in. That's when I saw it. The illusion. Christina was wearing a Chanel jacket. I recognized it. It was from a collection released 6 years ago. The tweed was fraying slightly at the cuffs. Her bag, a Louis Vuitton that used to be her armor, had a scuff mark on the corner that hadn't been repaired. Paige's designer sneakers were muddy and creased. It hit me then, a realization that felt like solving a chemical equation. They were projecting power they no longer possessed. It is the illusion of power in an empty wallet. For years, my mother had ruled our family through status. She hoarded approval like gold bullion. She acted as if she held the keys to a kingdom that I was desperate to enter. But status without the foundation of character, or in this case solvency, is just a costume. They were wearing their arrogance like a rented tuxedo. They believed that if they acted like they were in charge, the world would simply rearrange itself to match their delusion. They thought that by showing up with luggage and a "we forgive you," they could bypass the 13 years of work I had done. They thought they could colonize my success because they still saw me as a colony. But I wasn't a colony anymore. I was a sovereign nation. And nations defend their borders. I pressed the talk button. My voice filled the small speaker outside, crisp and magnified by the expensive audio system. "State your business," I said. They both jumped. They hadn't expected a voice from the wall. They expected the door to swing open. They expected me to appear small and apologetic, wiping flour from my hands. Christina squinted at the house. "Don't be ridiculous. It's your mother. Open the gate. It's raining." "I can see that," I said. "Why are you here?" "We're moving in," Paige said, her patience already snapping. "Mom told you. We're forgiving you. We're going to be a family again. Now open the damn gate, my hair is getting frizzed." "No," I said. The word was simple. It was small. But in the silence that followed, it felt like a boulder dropping into a canyon. "Excuse me," Christina's voice dropped an octave. The benevolence vanished, replaced by the steel I remembered from my childhood. "You do not say no to me. I am your mother. I am standing in the rain. You open this door right now, young lady, or you will regret it." "I don't think I will," I said. "You aren't guests. You are trespassers. You have 5 minutes to turn that truck around and leave my property before I call private security." "You wouldn't dare," Paige sneered. "You think you're better than us just because you have a big house. You're still just the girl who ruined my credit score." "And you," I said, my voice devoid of heat, "are wearing knockoff Gucci in a stranger's driveway. Goodbye." I severed the connection. The screen went silent, but the video feed remained. I watched them stare at the intercom box, stunned. They looked like actors who had forgotten their lines because the scenery had suddenly changed. They screamed things the microphone didn't pick up, but the gate held. The glass walls held. The illusion of their power shattered against the reality of my lock. When the intercom clicked off, I expected them to leave. I expected the humiliation of being rejected by a machine to drive them back into their truck. But I had forgotten who I was dealing with. Paige doesn't process rejection as a signal to stop. She processes it as a signal to change audiences. I watched on the monitor as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She didn't call a locksmith. She didn't call a hotel. She opened an app. I saw the ring light attachment snap onto the top of her case. It was a practiced motion, smooth and terrifyingly automatic. She smoothed her hair down, wiped the rain from her cheeks, and then, in a split second, her face transformed. The entitlement dissolved. In its place appeared a mask of trembling, heartbroken vulnerability. She held the phone up, angling it so my massive glass house loomed in the background like a villain's lair, while she and my mother looked small and abandoned in the foreground. She went live. I didn't need to hear the audio to know the script. I had heard variations of it my entire life. She was telling the world that they had come with open hearts. She was saying that her billionaire sister who had abandoned them when they needed her most was now letting them freeze in the rain. She was weaponizing her tears. It was a digital siege executed with the precision of a military strike. My own phone, sitting on the black marble island, began to vibrate. At first it was just a single buzz, then another, then a continuous angry hum that rattled against the stone like a trapped insect. I walked over and looked at the screen. Notifications were cascading down the glass. Text messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Direct messages from strangers. Missed calls from aunts who had called me difficult when I was 12 and hadn't thought of me since. "How could you do this to your mother? They are family, Jasmine. Open the door. Money really did change you." The flying monkeys had been deployed. Paige was painting a masterpiece of victimhood, and the internet was eating it up. They saw a wet, crying mother and a cold, silent house. They didn't see the $15,000 of stolen credit. They didn't see the 13 years of silence. They didn't see the knockoff designer clothes or the arrogance that had been there 30 seconds before the camera turned on. I stood there, watching the notifications pile up. A younger version of me would have panicked. I would have felt the crushing weight of their collective judgment and opened the door just to make the buzzing stop. I would have traded my peace for their approval. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I looked at the security feed. Paige was still talking to her phone, gesturing wildly at my front gate. Christina was standing behind her, head bowed, playing the role of the martyr perfectly. It was performance art. It was a desperate attempt to use public shame as a crowbar to pry open my life. They thought shame was a weapon that still worked on me. They didn't realize that when you build your life in the dark, alone, grinding through 18-hour days while everyone else sleeps, you become immune to the opinions of people who have never worked for anything. Their judgment wasn't heavy. It was just noise. It was the sound of people who had lost control and were screaming at the walls. I didn't block them. I didn't delete the messages. I reached out and pressed the Do Not Disturb button on the side of my phone. The screen went dark, The buzzing stopped. The silence in my kitchen returned heavy and absolute. I looked back at the security monitor. Let them scream at the rain. Let them tell their story to the internet. The internet couldn't open my gate. Only I could do that, and I was done negotiating with terrorists. I picked up the landline, a secure unlisted number that only 3 people had, and dialed the one person who could turn this digital siege into a very real, very legal route. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to act like the landlord. I didn't call the police. That would have been reactive. That would have been the move of a frightened woman trying to make a problem go away. I wasn't frightened. I was in business. And in business, you don't just react to a hostile takeover, you leverage your assets. I picked up the secure landline. I dialed David, my personal attorney and the only man who knew the full extent of my financial reach. He answered on the second ring. "Jasmine," he said, "I'm seeing a lot of activity on the perimeter alerts. Do we need law enforcement?" "Not yet," I said, watching Paige spin in a circle in the driveway, aiming her phone camera at my windows like a weapon. "I need you to open the file marked Project Amnesia, the asset acquisition from 3 months ago." "The foreclosure bundle?" David asked. "You want to activate it?" "Yes, send the notification to their phones." I hung up. Here is the thing about my family. They operate on the assumption that they are the main characters of the universe, and everyone else is just a supporting actor waiting in the wings to facilitate their storyline. They believed they had shown up at my house because they had forgiven me. They believed the narrative Paige was spinning on her live stream, that they were the benevolent peacemakers, and I was the cold-hearted villain. But they had missed a critical piece of information. They hadn't come to my house because they wanted a reunion. They had come because they had nowhere else to go. 3 months ago, my holding company, an anonymous entity buried under 3 layers of corporate shielding, purchased a portfolio of distressed mortgages in the greater Seattle area. It is a standard investment strategy for tax purposes. But when I was reviewing the list of assets, one address jumped out at me. A modest suburban house in a declining neighborhood. The house I grew up in. Christina hadn't paid her mortgage in 8 months. The bank was days away from auctioning it off to the highest bidder. She was going to be on the street. I could have let it happen. I could have let a stranger buy the debt and evict them. That would have been poetic justice. But I didn't. I bought the note. I bought the debt. I paid $240,000 to become the sole owner of my mother's financial future. I didn't do it to save them. I did it to buy time. I did it because I knew that if a stranger evicted them, they would eventually find their way to my doorstep desperate and chaotic. But if I owned the debt, I controlled the timeline. I had effectively been their landlord for 90 days and they didn't even know it. I watched the screen. Paige was still talking to her followers, wiping rain from her eyes for dramatic effect. Christina was pacing, looking at her phone, probably waiting for me to cave. Then it happened. Christina's phone pinged. A moment later, Paige's phone pinged. I saw the shift in real time. Christina looked down at her screen. She froze. The martyr act dropped instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. She tapped the screen, squinting against the rain. She lowered her phone, looking at the notification that had just come through. It wasn't a text from me. It was a formal legal alert from the holding company. It was a digital copy of the deed trust transfer identifying the new owner of their defaulted mortgage. Jasmine Reed Holdings, LLC. I saw Christina grab Paige's arm. I saw her mouth the words, "She owns it." They weren't standing in the driveway of a sister they could bully. They were standing in the driveway of their creditor. They thought they were negotiating a family reunion. They were actually negotiating with the bank. And the bank was closed. I pressed the intercom button again. The static crackled through the rain sharper this time. "Did you get the email?" I asked. They both looked up at the camera. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. In its place was the terrifying hollow look of people who realize they have walked into a trap they helped build. "You bought the house," Christina whispered, though the microphone picked it up clearly. "I bought your debt," I corrected. "I own the arrears, I own the interest. And as of this morning, I own the eviction order that was processed yesterday when you abandoned the property to come here." Jasmine Paige said, her voice trembling, and this time it wasn't for the camera. "We have nowhere to go." "I know," I said. "That's why I prepared the final ledger." "Please," Christina said. It was a single word, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of reversed roles. For 35 years, she had been the authority, the judge, the gatekeeper. Now, standing in the rain with her wet Chanel jacket and her ruined shoes, she was just a woman who had lost everything. The arrogance had dissolved, leaving behind a raw, desperate fear. "We have nowhere to go," Paige repeated, stepping closer to the camera. "Jasmine, seriously. The locks were changed yesterday. We packed what we could fit in the truck. If you don't let us in, we're sleeping in the cab." I looked at them on the monitor. A younger version of me would have crumbled. I would have seen their desperation and felt responsible for it. I would have opened the gate, made them tea, and let them turn my sanctuary into their refugee camp. I would have paid their debts again, just like I paid the credit card bill when I was 22. But I wasn't 22. I was 35. And I was a businesswoman. "I am not going to let you in," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the anger that used to consume me. "Anger is hot. This was cold. You are not coming into my home. You are not sleeping in my guest room. That boundary is absolute." "Then what are we supposed to do?" Christina cried, her composure finally breaking. "We're your family. You can't just leave us on the street." "I'm not leaving you on the street," I said. "I'm giving you a severance package." I tapped the screen on my tablet, sending a second document to their phones. "Check your email," I said. They looked down. I saw Paige's eyes widen as she read the subject line. "Lease agreement. Prepaid." "What is this?" she asked. "It's an apartment," I said. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. It's in Bremerton. It's clean, it's safe, and the rent is paid for 6 months. The utilities are in my name for now. There is a grocery store within walking distance and a bus line that runs to the city." Bremerton. Christina looked up horrified. That's miles away. It's across the water. It's in the middle of nowhere." "It's 3 towns over," I corrected. "And it is a roof over your head. It is more than you gave me when I left with 2 bags and a negative bank balance. It is a chance to start over. But there are conditions." "Conditions?" Paige scoffed, though the fight was draining out of her. "Yes. The lease is in my holding company's name. If you contact me directly, the lease is terminated. If you post about me on social media, the lease is terminated. If you show up at my gate again, the lease is terminated. You have 6 months to find jobs, save money, and build your own lives. After that, the rent is your responsibility." Christina stared at the camera. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was measuring the small paid-for apartment against the wet driveway and the cold reality of her situation. She was realizing that the daughter she had dismissed as difficult was the only safety net she had left. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this? After everything?" "Because I'm not you," I said. It was the only answer that mattered. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it so I could sleep at night knowing I hadn't become the monster they tried to paint me as. I was doing it to close the ledger. I was paying off the last of my guilt so I could finally be free. "The keys are in a lockbox at the property," I said. "The code is the date you stole my identity, Paige. I figured you'd remember it." Paige flinched. "You have the address," I said. "Go." For a long moment, nobody moved. The rain continued to fall, a gray curtain between their world and mine. Then slowly, Christina turned. She didn't look back at the camera. She walked to the U-Haul, her shoulders slumped, her expensive bag clutched to her chest like a shield that had failed. Paige looked at the lens one last time. There was no performance left, just a tired, defeated realization that the audience had gone home. She turned and followed her mother. I watched as they climbed into the cab of the truck. The engine roared to life, a harsh mechanical sound that broke the quiet of the forest. The reverse lights flared white in the gloom. Slowly, clumsily, the massive truck backed out of my driveway. It turned onto the main road and disappeared into the mist. I stood there for a long time, watching the empty driveway. The rain continued to fall, washing away the tire tracks, washing away the mud, washing away the last traces of the people who had tried to claim me. The gate clicked shut. The silence returned. And for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like victory. After the taillights of the U-Haul vanished into the fog, I didn't celebrate. I didn't open a bottle of champagne or dance around my kitchen. I simply exhaled. It was a long, slow breath that felt like letting go of a weight I had carried since I was a child. I turned away from the security monitor. The screen went dark, reflecting only the dim ambient light of my kitchen. I walked back to the island where the beaker of essential oils sat untouched. The scent of sandalwood and rain filled the air, grounding earthy real. I picked up the beaker and poured the mixture into a mold. My hands were steady, my mind was clear, the storm outside was passing, leaving behind a clean, washed world. I checked my email one last time. A notification from the property management company confirmed that the digital key code for the Bremerton apartment had been accessed. They had arrived. They were safe. They were housed. And they were gone. For 13 years, I had defined myself by my absence from their lives. I was the one who left. I was the one who stayed silent. But tonight I had redefined the terms. I wasn't just the one who left. I was the one who built something worth protecting. I had turned my trauma into a fortress, and when the siege came, the walls held. I walked to the floor to ceiling windows and looked out at the Puget Sound. The rain had stopped and the clouds were breaking apart, revealing slivers of a pale winter moon. The water below was dark and calm, a mirror reflecting the quiet strength of the night. I thought about the thousands of women and men who might be watching this story, recognizing their own reflection in the glass. People who have been told that their boundaries are cruel, people who have been called selfish for refusing to be consumed, people who have walked away from families that only knew how to take. To you, I want to say this: you are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to change the locks. You are allowed to build a life that is safe and quiet and entirely your own. And when the past comes knocking, demanding entry because they share your blood or your history, you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect the peace you have built. You are allowed to be the landlord of your own life. Because peace is not something you are given. It is something you make drop by drop, day by day, until you have enough to wash the slate clean. If this story spoke to you, if you found a piece of your own strength in the silence of my fortress, share it with someone who needs permission to close their own door. You are not alone, and you are free.